So where do you live now yourself?
I live up in Green Hills, so
Walkinstown. Walkinstown. Oh yeah, very good.
And my business is in Ballymount.
Mm.
I'm only about 5 minutes from the job. Same
That's
for
great.
the son as well.
Yeah, that's great.
That was grand to start off with a gig.
Mm.
It's not the top tip. I have to speak to it. Only when spoken to. No, God, no. I'm tired of talking to him. He's tired of talking to me. Are you talking every time? What do you know? I put my job at risk.
heartened to see the progress that has been made in that time frame in digitising all aspects of the construction supply chain. I think that we all believe that digitisation is now inevitable. The challenge, though, is focus going forward must be on strengthening and widening the pace of adoption. We have a full agenda today from experienced presenters, culminating a case study by Mola Architecture on the Brunswick Street Student Accommodation Project. I trust that you will all be able to wait to hear that shared experience of this film-based project. My commitment is to keep the agenda on time so we can get back to work at 10:30. First speaker today is the CEO of IBEC, Danny McCoy, who is a household name. Nested within the IBEC umbrella of organizations is the Building Materials Federation, representing a key part of the construction industry supply chain. Danny, unsurprisingly, has other commitments this morning and has asked to be excused after his speech. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Danny.
Thank you, John. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As John introduced me, Danny McCoy is my name. I'm CEO of IBEC. For those of you who don't know, IBEC is Ireland's largest business representative organisation and by far the largest lobbying organisation in the country. We're also a house of brands, as John indicated there, in the Buildings Materials Federation, BMF, very happily a part of CitA and supported in the NBC space as well, particularly as the roadmap. But in addition, we've got 43 sub-brands, so we range right across biopharma, medtech, retail, food, drink, small firms associations. We get to see quite a fair bit of different types of sectors. My own background is as an economist, so that when looking at BIM and the productivity issues, it's probably through that prism of economics that I'm looking at it. And to be blunt, to anybody observing the construction sector, particularly over the last number of years, it's how far behind it appears to be in terms of the use of digitalization and efficiency techniques. So the impression that's left, particularly in the last boom, was of an incredibly inefficient sector, particularly when it came to productivity per employee. So we'd observed that, yes, construction output was very dramatic during the so-called Celtic Tiger period, but you looked at the employment growth, on average during some of those years, it was 12% employment growth and 8% output growth, negative productivity. So that it seems to me from that kind of scaling that we're, anything that brings the discipline of efficiency, digitalization in terms of through that supply chain and getting delivery quicker, I think is hugely crucial. Because what you identify today, I believe, is both simultaneously effectiveness along with efficiency. It's one of the features that we have in our economy right now, and the need for what you're talking about today. Well, you're dealing maybe in the micro. What you're doing is going to be very significant for the macroeconomics of Ireland. In that context, I want to make a distinction between effectiveness and efficiency, because there's an obsession with efficiency. But there's an efficiency, is a bit like in running. Efficiency is like pace. I can run 4-minute mile pace. Unfortunately, I can't run a mile at 4-minute mile pace. So telling you what pace I can do something presupposes that I can actually get the job done. Effectiveness is the first order issue. Efficiency is a second order issue. And yet we obsess about the efficiency piece on the basis that we've assumed that we've actually got the effectiveness. The effectiveness is where your productivity and where the digitalization comes in. Second order issue is going to be the cost of that delivery. So I'm not dissing the cost piece, but I'm just saying that there's two aspects to this. And too often it would appear, at least the impression that's given, is that in the lack of having that digitalization through the production process, it gives rise to a whole host of inefficiencies and productivity problems of redesign, rebuild, and so on. So that's why the roadmap, I think, is transcends much more dramatically than just your sector, because right now in the economy, as you know, there's a really big demand for construction, not just residential housing, but all of the public infrastructure, the commercial buildings, etc. So in the last couple of minutes, maybe that might just share some insights around the economy to give you some of the context on where your work today and specifics of what you're doing. When you're down in that very much in the micro, I just want to give you a sense of that macro and make the bridge between what you're talking about in terms of productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness, and how that's needed right now in the economy. First of all, I'm 30 years as an economist. I've never seen an economy, never mind the Irish economy, the position that the Irish economy is in right now. Ireland is a frontier resource economy, and that knowledge is hugely misunderstood, because how you deal with such an economy is fundamentally different than irregular economic cycles. Of course, there's economic cycles underneath here, but the underlying trend in the economy, in my view, is a resource. So it's the equivalent of having an oil find. And if you don't believe me, what do I mean by frontier? What do I mean by resource? Well, first of all, 10 years ago, if you look at the Forbes top 10 companies, you'd see 4 oil and gas companies in the top 10. There's none, maybe there's one, but there's none effectively there now. General Electric would have been in that top 10 as well. It's not even the Dow Jones Index anymore. So what you've had is very tangible companies replaced now by what are believed to be intangible. So a lot of the value added is in this intangibility. So you're looking at the Facebooks, Amazon, Apples, etc., who have very little physical assets, where all of the value is in the intangible parts of their balance sheet. But even tangible companies are now increasingly driven by intangible assets. So if you look at Glanbia, very classic dairy co-op business, now moved into infant formula and increasingly into sports nutrition. In fact, one of the world's leading sport nutrition companies. So coming from the grass, extracting the nutrients, getting rid of the liquid, and suddenly they have a product that, yes, is tangible, but the value in the balance sheet is embedded in the value of their intellectual property, their brands, and so on, which you're talking about today in terms of that knowledge as embedded in the intellectual property that is digitalization. So Glanbia would have had a balance sheet value of intangible assets in 2000, the year 2000, of approximately €1 million. 1 million. Today, the value of their balance sheet on intangible assets is €1.3 billion. What I want to get across here is this is this new frontier, where you're moving from tangible to intangible, to the intellectual property to which you're discussing today on the intellectual properties being brought through the BIM into the construction sector. That's the frontier piece. Ireland's a frontier economy because it's capturing so much of this intellectual, intangible balance sheets into our economy in the last number of years. The question is, how did it land here? Well, in the interest of very little time, just to give you a taste for it, this is the alignment in corporate taxation with this idea of substance because of the work of the OECD. And so in the year 2015, where there's been a lot of controversy in the Irish economy about the numbers, is the balance sheets in Ireland increased, corporate balance sheets in Ireland increased by 40%, 40% in a single year. Now, lots of people believe there was no balance sheet of any significance in 2014, so 40% of very little would be very little. However, Ireland's had a build-up over 50 years of significant corporate balance sheets, CRH, Ryanair, Kerry, Glanbia, Primark, and also companies like Accenture become an Irish company, Ingersoll Rand, in advance of 2015. But in the year 2015, the corporate balance sheet increased by 40%. Companies like Medtronic, aircraft leasing companies like GPA, which are now called AirCap, moved their balance sheets back in. You say, so what? This is all funny money. Well, it's not. Because what happened from that balance sheet was a P&L extraction of about 60 billion, which yes, drove our GDP numbers up by 1/3 in a single year. But the consequence of that is that it's also been generative of huge resources. So for instance, in 2015, just to give you a sense and to finish up to keep John on time, is that in 15, That resource that was surged into our economy from this oil find that is intellectual property, because this is the new gold or oil of the modern world, which is intellectual property embedded in corporate balance sheets, gave rise to corporate tax revenue of significant proportion. Just here's a thought experiment for you early in the morning. The Department of Finance were expecting to get about 4.3 billion of corporate tax revenue in 2015. That was in November they made that prediction. 6 weeks later, when the money came in on the 31st of December, instead of 4.3 billion, they received 6.9 billion. 2.6 billion of a change. That's the end of the pipe. If the corporate tax rate of 12.5% or effectively more like 10, they'd missed 26 billion of profits embedded in the economy's balance sheets. In other words, Ryanair were producing €1 billion of profit in 2015. There was 26 Ryanairs the government had failed to observe in its balance sheets. By any imagination, that's an oil find in modern equivalent. And that has increased since. Consequence for your industry and the overlay is Ireland is awash with cash. Absolutely awash with cash in a way that is gargantuan in relative proportions to what normal economies can do. And the last piece, because no good turn goes unpunished, I couldn't leave it on an upbeat. Consequence is that is surging through our labour market right now. So we're experiencing the biggest loss of competitiveness that exceeds anything that went through the Celtic Tiger. Wage rates are going up dramatically, and productivity in terms of time committed is being withdrawn. Lots of people are taking more leave, more sabbatical, because the consequence of when wages go up, you expect people to offer more hours work, give up leisure. The problem is that if you put up the wages, the hours that already have been working are now more valuable, and they have to make a decision: do they have enough money, in inverted commas, from the wage increase? And so what they want is more time back. We watch those lifestyle changes as well. Lots of people are moving, looking for 4-day weeks because they want to concentrate on their lifestyle issues, be that whatever they want to do, become triathletes or whatever. Great if it keeps going. But it's a misread of how this economy has surged in the last number of years and how we got there. That's going to have huge consequences for all of your businesses. And I'm certain you're already observing that. The demand for much higher wages, flexibility around time, and the withdrawal. That's a productivity withdrawal. All the more reason why, when people are at work, keep this in the positive, that you get that maximum amount of productivity in the time that we'll be committing relative to those efficiencies. John, at that point, I might leave that as a kind of a macro point for the micro work you're doing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. The really positive there was what Danny said was the fact that the country is awash with cash. So really, the whole question of capital investment in technology really should not be a constraint. Unfortunately, I know for many of you, because of relatively low margins, it is a constraint. Let's move on to our next speaker, Alex Lubeck, who is Head of Digital Construction with BIM Object, which provides free BIM objects for designers and specifiers, regardless of what CAD system they use. Alex will speak on the role of smarter infrastructure in transforming the performance of infrastructure. Thank you, Alex.
So, in a slight change to my introduction, thank you for that. I have two hats. So I'm currently seconded from BIM Object to UK Government, so I head up digital construction on behalf of the Cabinet Office. UK Government report to the Cabinet Office and Treasury in a directorate called the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. First of all, I'd just like to say a huge thank you for the invite today. First time in Ireland, yeah, it's good to be here. So I'm going to mainly talk about kind of UK context and kind of where we are on that journey in terms of transforming infrastructure performance hopefully share some lessons learned in terms of our journey from a BIM perspective, but also some of where we're going to go. I will talk a little bit about what BIM objects do in a sort of short case study as an example of how these technologies might be applied as a client or main contractor or main consultant in construction delivery. So, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, we have a role at the centre of government to support all government departments to deliver projects better. Now that's not just construction and infrastructure. That's anything from building a nuclear submarine to universal tax credits to all sorts of types of projects from a transformation, digital, infrastructure and defence perspective. But in infrastructure and construction, we have a significant role to play as a government. We are the largest client in the UK, and I think that's reflected in Ireland as well. So, whilst I'm going to give you sort of a UK context and quite naive to the Irish issues, I will try and reflect on some of your National BIM Council strategy for digital transition as well. A couple of years ago, McKinsey did a report that recognised an opportunity for growth in the UK, which said that we're essentially missing out on about £15 billion worth of productivity each year in infrastructure and construction. I don't think £15 billion would probably buy you a third runway at Heathrow, just about, and a number of other massive projects. It would also buy you a significant number of schools that I can't calculate in my head right here and now. That is a huge productivity inefficiency that remains in our sector. Construction and infrastructure is probably the last major sector in the economy yet to have industrialised. And this is where the productivity gap is widening currently. So building information modelling and the UK government's mandate in 2016 and projected in 2011 within the first government construction strategy in the UK was an indication that enough is enough. From a productivity perspective, we need to drive this industry forward and change some of the cultures and behaviours that have become the norm. So one of the examples a colleague of mine would always use is that if you put a builder who built a pyramid on a construction site today, they'd probably recognise about 50% of all the trades and things going on. If you put them in a factory where they build cars, they would think they're on a different planet. We are still doing the same things we've been doing for thousands of years, using the same methods, and we need to industrialise what we're doing. Because the opportunity for growth is clear. So, whilst I'm hitting the industry over the head slightly with a large hammer, the UK performs reasonably well compared to its international peers. We're reasonably good by comparison in this sector, and I suspect Ireland is probably in a similar quadrant given the technology availability and the skills availability. Listening to Danny there was really insightful in terms of taking an economics kind of view, because from a government perspective, this is the view they're taking. This is how they are looking to balance the economy. This is how they are looking to promote the capability and actually use this as an opportunity to not just digitalise but transform a sector so it becomes valuable as an export as well. So what are we doing? In the autumn last year, we started to take the next step on our journey. So if I was to take lessons learned from the UK BIM mandate of 2016, is that on April 4th, 2016, the balloons came down, the streamers and the fireworks went off, and the next day was exactly the same as the day before. We set out this mandate, which was fantastic and insightful and has had a catalytic effect on the industry. There's no doubt, and the technology sector's engagement in this market. Yet, it wasn't as clear a connected plan to why we are doing this and what do we value as a UK. What do we value in regards to our priorities in growth, and our other strategies from an industrial perspective. How do we want to create the best possible spaces where people live, work, commute, etc. So we took the next step on that journey, and in the autumn, our UK budget announced moving to a resumption in favour of off-site manufacturing. Now, does that mean a return to prefab and modular builds? Absolutely not. We are very much focused on manufacturing processes. This is a language issue, which we'll come back to a little bit later. Okay? We're looking at taking learnings from other sectors and actually bringing that into the construction and infrastructure sector. BIM Level 2 was the first sort of step on that journey through standardisation, and this is the next step that we're taking. This was supported by a document that we produced in the Infrastructure and Projects Authority called Transforming Infrastructure Performance, which is what I'm going to talk about today. From the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is our sort of outward-facing department to industry, we produced our industrial strategy, and we also produced the transport infrastructure efficiency strategy. Now, there's more pages in there to read than there is bedtime, so I suspect. So it's not for everyone, and it doesn't reach the 99% of people that don't read policy documents. However, the first time in my career in this sector, I recognised that these were connected, coherent strategies, all talking to each other. So we're going from strategy and policy now into delivery, and how do we kind of effect that market shift so we have a sustainable sector for the future? So first of all, just quick on the industrial strategy. So the things that we are focusing on are innovation, people, so do we have the skills to deliver what we're saying? Infrastructure, do we have the supporting things in place? That's not just physical infrastructure, that's digital infrastructure as well. From a place perspective, how do we rebalance the investment in the UK? Not necessarily away from the southeast, but recognising the value other parts of the country has. And reflecting with Alan last evening, there's a concentration, I believe, in and around Dublin in regards to investment that isn't necessarily felt in other parts of the country. So how do you use digital and technology and the lever of construction and infrastructure to support other parts of the Irish economy as well as the UK economy to serve the hotter markets and not restrain that pace, but support it effectively so that the wealth is distributed effectively. And there's also the business environment. So how do we take those technologies and start to commercialise them? And what role does government play in driving that ambition? So within the industrial strategy, we created a new sector deal. This is the first time we've had a sector deal with the construction industry. This was focused on procuring for value, industry-led innovation, which is digital manufacturing and whole life performance, skills for the future, and exports and international. This is very much related in how we would like to kind of take the construction and infrastructure industry forward as well. We see a huge opportunity off the back of BIM Level 2, where we are starting to export our support services around the globe in different countries. And we see manufacturing as an opportunity to add the next layer to that in construction. We've also created an industrial strategy challenge fund for clean growth. And within that, there's something called Transforming Construction. So there's up to £170 million worth of essentially pump priming from government to encourage the digital and manufacturing technologies to proliferate. There is no one stopping any Irish company joining up and partnering with some of the programs in the UK around that industrial strategy challenge fund. There is no barrier to entry in that sense. So if you do have offices and locations in the UK or partners that you work with, perhaps it might be a question that we want to take away from today. How are they getting involved in terms of this industrialisation process in the UK? So anyway, transforming infrastructure performance. The broader vision for what I will now call TIP, as it's been affectionately known, we're looking at significantly improving the way in which infrastructure is planned, procured and delivered to focus on whole life performance. Through the government construction strategy, we have saved somewhere between 12 and 20% in regards to capital costs, and that was a suite of measures, including BIM Level 2, that helped to save that through capital spending departments. Yet, we've not necessarily produced the highest performing pieces of infrastructure. We've not necessarily produced infrastructure that, in operation, doesn't cost us a significant amount more. And whilst this is a very kind of hard challenge to address, we're taking a 10-year view through TIP to establish the baselines, the benchmarks, the procurement models, how we align and integrate different departments, and how we use smarter technology and manufacturing adoption to actually encourage a whole life performance view on the delivery of construction and infrastructure. But as I said, right now, we're starting to cross the valley of death. All the policy people have written their documents and are very delighted. They've patted themselves on the back and they've walked out the door. And the delivery people are now left holding something that they're trying to enact. This is a hugely complicated matter that we're trying to address, but we're not afraid of addressing it, actually, because the construction and infrastructure market is too significant and too important to any economy to ignore. And we do feel that if we can stay at the forefront of this, and BIM Level 2 is the catalyst for that change, then we've got a great opportunity to share and engage overseas in the future through construction and infrastructure. So parking the Brexit question in the room, this is an opportunity to engage with many different countries in a very different way around construction and infrastructure. We have a significant professional services industry in the UK that is exported around the globe. Our constructors and our manufacturers don't necessarily follow us when we go there. So we have great responsibility and opportunities from a professional services perspective, but it's very difficult for construction firms and manufacturers to join us on that journey as well. So we need to create an environment to cross that valley of death that allows us to take the steps we need to do in the short term, build the capability of the clients across government departments in the UK, and support the standards, education, the technology requirements, and essentially the cultural aspects of this and the commercial models to create the right environment for us to exploit this in the future. And why would we need to do that? Construction is about 6 to 8% of our GDP. I don't know what the Irish figure is, but I suspect it's somewhere in a similar order. From a workforce perspective, it's somewhere between 8 to 10% of the UK workforce, so it's a significant employer, and I'd imagine that's probably fairly consistent in the Irish market as well. But we've identified a £600 billion pipeline of work, just as a government, either through our direct investment or investment into energy projects and private initiatives in the utilities market over the next 10 years, so up to 26, 27. So that gives you a feel of kind of how significant our pipeline is and the investment. But if we carry on delivering traditionally the same way, a number of things will happen. One, we won't have enough skills in the marketplace to deliver that £600 billion pipeline in the time frame required. So there is a significant shortage of engineering and design capability. There's a significant shortage of labour if you're delivering traditionally to that marketplace. So for £60 billion a year, essentially over the next 10 years, we need to understand what do we value and what do we want out of that spend. So it's not just about procuring the same way we always have, expecting the supply chain to respond in a sort of post-Brexit environment where access to labour might be constrained in a different way. So we're using the lever of digital and manufacturing to address a number of issues here, not just productivity and growth, but also governance risk and resilience to those issues. We're looking at manufacturing as an opportunity to serve overheated areas of the country from locations which require further investment and support. So this is a part of a rebalancing of the economy in terms of construction and infrastructure that we're looking at as well. So it's not just about can we do it faster and cheaper. This is about can we get the best quality product to the right location at the right time to serve our customer, which is the taxpayers in the UK. So in terms of what do we want for our investment, as an IPA, or Infrastructure and Projects Authority, we're very much at that top level, at the system level. We're looking at metrics around labour productivity, which I think Danny reflected on earlier. We're looking at rebalancing the economy. We're looking at apprentices, SMEs, a number of different policy agendas. And we're considering our benchmarking approach and how we kind of take this forward in those four broad categories. So I'll give you an example. The housing ministry here would be a network level contributor. They would have a portfolio of programs and projects which eventually become assets in that life cycle. And they will have a number of metrics themselves which they have to meet. So in the UK, the housing expectation is to deliver 1.5 million homes in the next 4 to 5 years. That would be 500,000 more homes than the market's likely to create if we stand still and do exactly the same things from a traditional perspective. We're using digital and manufacturing technologies. We're looking at how do we use moving to a resumption in favour of offsite as a lever for change to start to accelerate housing and accelerate the support we can provide to those people that are struggling to get on housing. It's a significant issue in the UK as it is in Ireland. The higher cost, particularly in the London area and the southeast, makes it prohibitive to many people to live and work in those areas. And the knock-on impact of that, from an economic and social perspective, could be anything from less productivity, which has a financial impact, to health and well-being. And in an industry in the UK where 10% of all our suicides in the UK come from the construction sector, and 75% of the suicides in the UK are men, well-being is quite an important issue, actually. And if we can help people to live and work in stable jobs, stable locations, with some longevity, then that is another factor that puts a positive spin on how we deliver a digital and manufacturing agenda. So again, it's not just about the productivity aspect. This has a significant number of other opportunities to give people stable environments to work in. We put people in very harsh environments, particularly in infrastructure, in odd locations, away from people's families, putting them up for 2 or 3 nights in caravans in the middle of nowhere, and expecting them to deliver a job in difficult conditions without really addressing the options and the opportunities that are available to us. And this is about addressing those opportunities. So, within our TIP programme, we have something called Smarter Infrastructure. I lead this for our Infrastructure and Projects Authority. This is focused on not just digital and manufacturing, but also knowledge management. There are some fantastic things that go on out there in the industry that are known, yet we fail to deliver these consistently across the piece. So how do we actually bring these technologies to bear and strategically move forward as departments, as government, as industry, and make these things the norm? And hopefully this digital transition roadmap is a part of making digital the norm within the Irish construction sector. So let's discuss. There are a number of different components to our manufacturing approach, but we're aiming for that top right-hand corner. We recognise that whilst volumetric or modular construction is one approach, componentisation is another approach to off-site construction. We're actually looking at manufacturing processes and how do we bring the most effective production system to delivering our construction and infrastructure that ultimately provides the best service to our customers. To do that, those technical things that need to be established are quite well known. Actually, we understand what we need to do from a technical perspective, we just got to get on and do it. From a commercial perspective, we don't necessarily have all the answers today. So I put this graphic up on the screen. So this is not policy. You won't find this in any documents. This is my interpretation of life from a procurement perspective. But today, we're somewhere between design and build and integrated project delivery. The reason it's the shape of a boomerang is that actually, if we move to a more standardised and mass customisable approach to repeatable construction, then we won't just be procuring people and services to collaborate with from an integrated project delivery perspective. We will also be portfolio and programme level transacting with the manufacturing supply chain to procure the things that we do know we want. So I was saying to someone earlier, if we've built schools for I don't know how long as a government, so you would think we would know what we want. We have standard designs, yet every single time we procure a new design, we defer the risk, we expect the supply chain to create something that is aesthetically pleasing within a cost envelope without having used any of the repeatable aspects of what we know is exactly a standard space. So from a classroom perspective, we know our classrooms, and this is a current discussion ongoing in the Department for Education, our current specification says a classroom should be 55 to 57 square metres, and we're saying if we move to a standardised approach, the optimum space for you will be 62.5 square metres. And we will deliver that for significantly less, significantly faster, and significantly higher quality. However, culturally, that's not the way we've always done things. So it's quite a difficult thing for lots of people to understand, to accept. So there's quite a lot of stuff to kind of go on here in terms of the cultural barriers and the commercial challenges to change. So one of the cultural challenges is taxonomy. We've got to speak the same language. We're talking modern methods of construction, manufacturing, modular, off-site. And we've got a number of skills challenges and risk challenges to address. But the two things that are different now to what they were is digital and consumer behaviour. Everything now is on demand, and everything else in my life is digital. So why not construction and infrastructure? So the three challenges ahead of us: productivity and growth, transparency and accountability. Digital makes things more transparent and more accountable. But security and resilience. We must be more secure with our data as well. And we must consider resilience when we're planning for construction and infrastructure, whether that's global warming or other aspects of the environment. And digital gives us that opportunity to flexibly rearrange spaces through BIM, through other technologies, to provide options and the best value for money. So what does this mean to you? I picked this up out of the transition roadmap, and I think this is a super ambitious plan, and I think it's a great plan. And I would really encourage everyone in the room to get on that journey as soon as possible, if you're not already. 20% reduction in CapEx cost is great. In the UK, we did that through the government construction strategy. But I would urge you to kind of think about whole life performance as well at the same time. Stand on the shoulders of others who are going in that direction and take that opportunity. Reduction in delivery program, this is absolutely possible through this approach from a manufacturing and digital perspective as well. And in terms of increasing exports, there's a significant opportunity to engage with not just the UK in a post-Brexit world, but the globe through digital. So in summary, construction is moving from a goods-based sector in a very transactional environment to a service-based sector. Technology and information will enable us to mass customise construction. So for the repeatable things we buy, the vision will be we will be buying construction and infrastructure as a public sector like we buy cars or kitchens off the internet today. This is already happening. The shoots are out there, particularly in the housing market in the UK. The technology is live, it's real, it's happening. We have to consider what that means for our own roles. We have to consider how we would engage with that, have to consider how we prosper from that. And we want to get the talents in the industry focusing on what's important and delivers value for money. To export to the UK in this market, it needs to be digital. From a BIM perspective, to be able to represent your products, your ideas, your designs, and be able to communicate that into international markets, to be able to share that before having to invest in physical infrastructure, tangible things, as we heard from Danny earlier, in that market. To understand, do you have a pipeline? Do you have something sustainable to step into that market? Digital is a fantastic way to reach out to the globe. We are in a global economy, not just a national economy. And if we get this right, the possibilities and the benefits for change are significant. BIM level 2, through standardisation and moving to digital, is the first step into a significantly more effective and productive industry that delivers the service and whole life performance that our taxpayers demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was very stimulating. Lots of documents. I need towards post-meeting meeting. Our next speaker is Owen Leonard, Owen is the CEO of I3PT, not the easiest acronym to say. 3PT certification is the leading independent assigned certification firm specialising in auditing and certification of critical building elements on large construction projects under the BCAR regulations. He will speak on the very apt topic of using the power of technology to drive improved behaviours in our industry. And by the way, Owen has just driven from Cork this morning, so he's definitely right away.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks, Alex. That was very enlightening. Thanks, Alan, and you guys at CitA for asking me to speak here today. I suppose when I was looking at the agenda, I knew that I was going to get a big picture on the overall digital construction landscape in the UK and the impact of a practitioner's approach. And my title sounds very empowering and very exciting, but unfortunately I'm going to focus for a little bit on the valley of death, which Alex was describing. I think Alex is describing the chasm between coming up with a policy and executing that policy. I think when I look at this here, we've got leadership standards, education and training and procurement. One of the things that kind of feeds through all of this is people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about behaviour today, because to go with any strategy that's going to be effective, you have to consider human beings. Okay, so one of the things which John alluded to, we're a building certification firm. I founded I3PT back in 2010, and I think the core reason for setting the company was to deliver better buildings, and we do that through review and inspection, design and construction. Okay. So at a very early stage, it became obvious that it had to be a digital journey, and we need to see where things were going. And in many respects, I3PT is the love child of three passions of mine, which are construction, technology, and sociology. Okay, so just to give a brief overview, for the first part of the presentation, I'm going to focus more on the why, I guess, technology and behavioural change, and between those two things. The importance of moral engagement in industry, and I'm going to focus on moral disengagement and how that occurs, because we've had some issues with that in the past. And lessons from other sectors, and then very briefly at the end, we're just going to talk about the how and some of our experiences. And I'll jump into that. So just to frame the presentation, one of the first things I want to make a point about is, irrespective of the level of genius attributed to any technological change and or innovation, the greatest factor in the success or failure of any initiative is people. Okay? So we can have incredible leadership, great standards, wonderful technology, and none of those things are really a challenge, I think, to deliver a roadmap like this. But human beings and their behaviour, to a large extent, will dictate whether or not something will be success or failure. So unless we can fine-tune our understanding of human beings and what drives their behaviour, we'll fail to deliver. We'll fail to deliver the governance and leadership required to realise the potential of innovation itself. So, I guess, why should companies focus on behaviour at a micro level? Why should we care about this kind of thing? We all understand the benefits of investing in technology. Most of our companies have seen something of a technological revolution. The term cloud computing or cloud technology is now ubiquitous. You no longer need to say it. So we've seen a quite revolution in technology companies over the last while, and the investment in technology is understood. But why should companies focus on behaviour? I guess Gallup research, it's a pretty large research project. They found that companies that apply the principles of behavioural economics outperform their peers by 85% in sales growth and 25% in gross margin. So they tend to be more successful in terms of their growth. They tend to be more profitable in the long run. Okay? They understand people better. Nonetheless, many organisations still take a technology-first approach. This can be an error. Okay? So one, in my opinion, doesn't go very well with the other. I suppose with a deeper understanding of what makes people tick, technology and business leaders make better technology decisions. We create more meaningful digital transformations, engaging experiences, and valuable disruptions. The concept of disruption is often kind of portrayed, it's an overused term. It's portrayed in a positive light more often than not. We hear about disruptive technology and disruptive companies and how good that all is. Disruption is only good if people latch onto it the right way. And if people were to latch onto modern methods of construction, for example, the very thing that makes it a benefit, repeatable nature of what you're doing, it works very well if you're doing it correctly at the outset. But for culture and the behaviours and the training and the standards that we deploy in offset manufacturing are not robust, then failures become inherent in the process, and those failures become a major issue. Okay, so the disruption is only a positive thing if it's dealt with correctly. So with a view to that, I'm going to talk about behavioural design for a moment. And behavioural design, by definition, it marries behavioural economics and human-centred design. Like Apple did this incredibly well. Okay, so we look at behavioural economics. Just to give a very brief overview of behavioural economics, it's a relatively recent, I suppose not recent, but there's been an awful lot more study of behavioural economics since the financial crash. People look an awful lot more about how people make decisions in terms of economics, not just in terms of your how you spend your own money, but in terms of how government spend. And traditional economic theory is based on the idea that we're all rational. So when we walk into a shop to buy a television, we look at it and we say, okay, well, the wall in my home is 12 feet wide by 9 feet tall. I can logically fit a 32-inch TV there. Whereas most people walk in and say, well, it's a 65-inch television. How am I going to justify this? And they work back from that. Okay, so a lot of people don't use rational, logical, mathematical type decision making when they come to make decisions about how they spend money. So it explores the entire decision making process with an eye to factors that affect individual choices. And as such, this helps increase the likelihood that new products or technologies will be adopted. And it's looking at digital construction and bringing it back to that. The idea of self and kinship is a big factor here. So the person's sense of self, individually and socially. How does this reflect on me? Okay, there's a big issue in digital construction with the sense of self and kinship. I think there's a multi-tiered system in human construction. There's a whole subsection of the construction industry that feels that digital construction is not something that belongs to them. And when we talk about taxonomy in terms of crossing the chasm and actually getting the real benefits that we want to get out of digital construction, we have to be able to relate technology and these processes to everybody in the construction project, not just the design teams, the clients next to it. Expectations, you could also read this to be biases, okay, the attitudes and presumptions that people bring to previous experiences. And we'll talk about biases a little bit later on, but people have been constructing since long before the purpose, okay? And certainly people were dealing with it on a daily basis in construction for decades. Why do I need this stuff? So why do I need it now? Okay? You have to be able to address those questions, and you can't just dismiss them. Okay? Influences, the social norms and cultural forces that shapes a person's beliefs. I use the word beliefs instead of ideas. Okay? Beliefs are much stronger than ideas. A great saying I once heard was somebody said people will do anything for their beliefs except think of them. And I think that applies to construction as well. In terms of social norms and cultural forces, even different disciplines within construction have those types of challenges. There are social norms and cultural influences And again, for this to be effective and for technology to be effective and for it to be fully endorsed and adopted, that needs to be factored in. Framing, and this is a big one, resonating folks. How do you frame the discussion around this? When you talk to a client, there's one conversation about digital construction. When you talk to a subcontractor on the ground, it should be a very different conversation. Okay? You need to frame it in a way that they can see the benefits of that. And time distortion is a big one, and this is something that everyone in this room should understand. Because we regularly have to make a pitch to a client about the benefits of investing in digital construction and digital technology at the outset. And the time distortion is the way in which people overvalue the present and poorly understand the future. So when you're building something that's going to be implemented for a lot longer than you are, you should be making investments at the present benefit of the long. We all understand that, but we make decisions, people make decisions that are contrary to that. I think behavior economics. Barriers and enablers, situations which hinder or empower the ability to make choices or reach goals. What are the inhibitors here? What are the things that are going to stop people from actually adopting and running with these things? Primarily, it was going to be things in terms of inhibitors or barriers. It's going to be things like large investments in hardware. It's going to be things like training. In terms of enablers, it will be things like leadership development. It will be things like funding. It will be things like subsidizing and helping people get trained up with this stuff and supporting their level institutes. Okay. And without these things, again, technology will not be adopted. And I suppose in terms of experience, the structure and sequencing of key interactions, and what we're seeing here is pulling it down a bit of that. So I suppose by combining the principles of behavioral economics and user insights and business management, organizations can more systematically mitigate the risks of introducing these technologies and products and solutions. And indeed, this approach has driven some of the greatest disruption in the consumer market. So we've seen an awful lot of big changes in recent years. People like Amazon disrupted the retail space, Amazon Prime with television and Netflix. So, you know, and speaking about these things is not alien to what we're doing. We just heard Alex speak about the moment. The very same people who consume these products and these products are people who deal with them. And we can make life easier in the same way that these products and these new individuals make life easier, so we're much more likely to get by. Okay. So it's not alien to us. So moral disengagement in industry. In our specific business, which is we're in the business of managing and trying to mitigate construction defects primarily. ITMT does two things, by the way. We do that, which is building certification, and we also write software. So we've been writing software for a number of years, 7, 8 years now. Principally, the process was designed around managing our own quality management systems and this defect management and inspection and certification process. But over the years, it's grown quite a bit. It's taken on some people out of its own. But over the course of this journey, we looked at a lot of moral disengagement. Okay? And when you look at construction defects and the types of things that we're now dealing with in defective buildings, things we've seen in the news over the last number of years, at some point along the way, there has been moral disengagement in most of us. I want to just talk about a little bit of analysis and diagnosis of the types of things that need to be present for moral disengagement to happen in industry before we can actually think about it and overcome those challenges. So, psychological theories of morality focus heavily on moral thought and not so much on moral conduct. Okay, so when we think about morality, we think more about what we think about things and less so about our actions. And that's interesting because people suffer from the wrongs done to them irrespective of whether the perpetrator is justified. When we were saying the company, we did some initial research. We were looking at quite a lot of funding from like Enterprise Ireland. We did a lot of research around building defects. We met people who would have been involved in projects such as Barry Hall, which was very topical at the time. A number of other significant construction defects in Canada, New Zealand, and other areas. And we spoke with subcontractors, we spoke with clients, we spoke with hosts of stakeholders. And one thing was quite common throughout: it was never their fault. Nobody ever saw that their actions had resulted in failures. And I can remember at one point, we really good interview with a subcontractor who was involved in installing passive fire systems. It was drywall or plasterboard arrangements. And when we asked him what was wrong, he told us the developer was a bad guy. It was design, it was this, that, the way the boss was actually a bad guy as well. And we said at the end of the interview, always at the end, because usually a lot of the interviews will close very quickly, to what extent do you feel responsible? To what extent were you responsible for the failure? Did your boss didn't pick up a hammer and say, the developer didn't pick up a hammer and say, you were the guy there delivering the work? majority of human beings wish to view themselves as good people. We like to be able to look in the mirror. Okay? We like to be able to say we're good people. We do things for moral reasons. But the extent to which we self-regulate behavior varies depending on whether or not we choose to activate our moral agency. So there's times we choose not to. There's times when we turn a blind eye. Okay? And really I want to talk about that. So there are many social and psychological maneuvers by which moral self-sanctions can be disengaged from one's conduct, and this moral disengagement can be conscious or subconscious. We either know we're doing it sometimes and sometimes we don't. So just to delve into that, moral justification is one of the first things that I want to talk about. This occurs when people engage in reconstruction of the behavior itself. Okay? People don't ordinarily engage in harmful conduct until they've justified it to themselves and morality of their actions. So I'm going to do something here. You know, I'm doing this because I'm working in a team. And we have to get this job over the lifetime. Behavioral economists, there's a guy called Danny Ariely, an Israeli guy who's worth looking up. Danny Ariely did a lot of research on this. People cheat about 4 times as much in teams. Okay? They're much more likely to do something that's contrary to their moral code when they work in teams. Everything in construction is built around teams. For the common good. Okay? We can do an awful lot of things for the common good. Alex mentioned a moment ago about accountability and transparency that digital construction brings. Okay? That's a really, really key. That's one of the lessons we learned is individual accountability is huge. Okay? It makes it more difficult to morally justify certain actions. And in the process of this moral justification, the action itself, personally and socially acceptable by portraying it is serving a socially worthy cause. One of the things that came up through the research we did on the living defects of people was this thing, when all else fails, I have to keep my job. That's a very, very strong driver. Pretty much justify anything here. So you just need to really drill into this if you want to make people change. People can act on moral imperative because they're view themselves as more likely by inflicting harm. They do this. And it's often present in warfare. Okay, which we'll talk a little bit about again more. There's a little bit of an unhealthy relationship between military strategy and how we speak and think about what we do. But you know, some of the things are present there. But also happens in industry. And Paul Gerard had a great quote about this. He said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." Okay, that's quite extreme. He was talking about war. It's very relevant today to all of us in terms of political climate and everything else. But this also applies on the macro level. If you're working for a company where you are being led to believe that there's moral imperative, there's something you have to do to get you over the line, it's a minimum viable approach. You can justify that. We saw a lot of this probably in the past. Euphemistic labeling. Okay, people think in words and vocabulary is very important. Talk about taxonomy and language does shape our thought patterns. Okay, and they're the thought patterns which are actions are based. Activities take on a very different appearance depending on what they're called. And we hear the sanitization of language all the time now in the news. We don't even notice anything. You hear about somebody bombing a village in a remote region of the world. You hear generals talking about clean surgical strikes. It invokes an imagery of something almost healthy. Okay, it's dangerous stuff. Friendly fire sounds like a fine thing. Even practical completion in our industry is contains something very different to what it really means. See, practical completion, not very anything but practically. Okay, so language is important, and we use language in construction increasingly to distance ourselves from more our language. It might be money, or it might be getting something over the line. We use an awful lot of our own acronym, our own language now. So not surprisingly, euphemistic language is widely used to make harmful conduct respectable and to reduce personal responsibility for that. And then people sanitize that behavior by giving a nicer sounding label. Advantageous comparison was one of the biggest ones we came across. This is another way of making harmful conduct look good. Okay? While behavior is viewed and colored by what it compared against. I was lucky enough growing up to have my younger brother was a complete tearaway. Right? So whatever he did, I could turn to my parents and say, "Last week Michael did this." And it gave me an advantageous comparison. So my parents came to the view that I was actually the okay one, you know, and I got away with murder. And actually, that's something we do in our own lives, but we also do it in the industry quite a lot. Phrases like this is common practice, what we call manner of sins. Common practice, what we call manner of sins. Everybody does this. You should see what our competitors do. That's the kind of thing we hear all the time. Right? It's very dangerous. It seems harmless. It's quite dangerous. Displacement of responsibility is a big one. And again, it goes back to that previous research I discussed. So moral control operates most strongly when people acknowledge that they cause harm by their own actions. People behave in ways that they normally repudiate if legitimate party accepts responsibility for their knowledge. One thing I'd ask you to Google if you get a chance at a later date, we're not trying to go through it, but it's Milgram's obedience study. It goes to this thing about displacement of responsibility. I like the Nuremberg defense, let's just follow orders. Okay? People will do all kinds of things if there's a perceived authority that will take responsibility. And construction projects are full of perceived authority. So, under this displaced responsibility, people view their actions as stemming from the dictates of an authority rather than them being responsible for themselves. Firms can authorize moral actions without direct authorization. Okay, so rarely do you see a firm assume responsibility open for this kind of stuff. In many cases, they remain consciously uninformed. Get it done ASAP. We need you on the other side. I told you to cut corners. You have told me that you need another 3 weeks, and I told you got one. Okay? I don't really care. I don't want to know. Just get it done. Move on. We need it on the side. In the context of the current skills shortage, this is one we should be thinking about a great deal. What are the leaders of the companies who are employing on site saying to their staff? Okay? Because if this occurs again, because it did occur before, we had a skills shortage and a massive increase in construction activity at more or less the same time before, it can be a big problem. Okay, so one of the things we do with technology as much as possible, we try to make it the responsibility of the man on site, the person that they put on site. We try to make that link between their moral duties and what they have to do on this project. Diffusion of responsibility, again, personal agencies, this is different from displacing it, it's diffusion, sharing. Okay. Personal agency gets obscured by diffusing personal accountability. There are several ways of doing it, right? But a sense of responsibility can be diffused and thereby diminished by division of labor. It's a direct quote from an excellent academic paper, which I'll share with Alan distribution. But construction is based almost entirely on division of labor. Okay? It's inherent in what we do. Group decision making is another common practice that gets otherwise considered people behaving maybe and talk about cheating in teams. When everyone is responsible, nobody feels responsible. And this is particularly right in construction. The CC everybody culture, copy 25 people, and hopefully I can get out of the problem myself and I can shift the blame around somewhere here. And the very nature of subcontracting itself leads to a natural diffusion of responsibility. Okay. It's holding the light around as far as we're not quite sure. Okay. And somebody recently described to me, he was working on an oil rig construction project. He described working on an oil rig construction project as like flying an airplane where everybody's going to set the controls. Like really scary thought, right? Construction projects are a bit like that. You just need one person to make it ticket. And more often than not, it's not structural. It's not one of the really, really big ticket items we're all concerned about. It'll be a minor detail. It'll be a subcontractor. It has to do something. It has to do it again and again and again and again. That's the type of thing which in modern methods of construction is a problem. Also, if the specific construction detail is missed, it's a big challenge. Disregard or distortion of consequences. Again, briefly on this one. This is when people pursue activities that are harmful to others for personal gain, and they try to convince themselves that it's not actually that serious. And this was one that came up in the research as well. Was people saying, actually, look, you know, we spoke to an architect of a building that was condemned for fire safety reasons. And he still maintained, even though it had been reviewed and been shut down and effectively evacuated, he still maintained the building was fine. There's nothing wrong with that building. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that building. Regulations are met. Okay, so you can disregard or distort the consequences of the outcome. What I did there was nothing wrong with it. Okay. So this availability bias is a big thing as well. Biases are irregular, but the availability bias is particularly challenging in construction. Because we don't have seismic activity, because we don't have a very hard time, we don't have that many catastrophic building failures. Okay. And we also have a good education platform. We also have good rites of passage for construction professionals. But also you do get this thing where people say, well, I've delivered complex buildings and I've never had a problem. Why would this be a problem now? So there is another major issue here, and it speaks to that time distortion that we talked about previously. So, and then the final one in terms of moral engagement is this idea of dehumanization. And that's where somebody can dehumanize the victim or the person who's going to be affected. And this happens quite a lot with projects where we see client, contractor, the architect, their own boss, whoever they choose to dehumanize. It makes it much easier to disengage from your own model. The client didn't pay for quality, so it couldn't deliver a good job. We've heard that before. But the architect design it on them, money paid to build it design. Okay. So if you can put somebody in a position, if you can pigeonhole them and say, black guy's a bad guy, I couldn't do a good job. What we're talking about here is we work in an industry where it's possible for somebody to not feel any responsibility for what they do. That's a challenge for all of us. And the next stage of this, I guess, is to look at how we can learn in this. Alex alluded to earlier in other industries. Okay. Medicine, for example, introduced in recent years are central line infections, which will save thousands of lives every year in the US. There's a guy called Atul Gawande who wrote a great book called Checklist Manifesto. If anyone's interested in this kind of stuff, it's a great book to read. And he's a surgeon, and he did a huge amount of research around how to prevent types of preventable failures in hospitals. That in the US, for example, 2 million people a year leave hospital with infection into the women. 2 million people a year. 8,000 people per year die from preventable healthcare disasters in operations. And this guy looked at it and he did a lot of work around looking at cause of some of these failures. Central line infections being one of the biggest causes of infections. And he looked at it as he developed a 5-step checklist for central line infections, which reduced the number of deaths in some of the hospitals in South Carolina by about 98%. Deaths from central line infections. If you track the central line infection, you're already quite sick. You've got an 80% chance of being killed. Okay. It was a simple 5-step checklist. This is quite relevant to us because medicine, like construction, has evolved to have a multidisciplinary team of super specialists. We used to be termed as a master builder. He was the architect, he was the engineer, he was the guy who went to everything. But over time, we've evolved to having super specialists. The architect, has a consultancy, for safety, potentially for facade, depending on the project. We're increasingly becoming more and more specialized because we're surrounded by extreme complexity. And what Atul Gawande spent an awful lot of time looking at is this idea of, in an age of extreme complexity, how do we navigate that? How do we use simple tools, simple technology to improve things? And he helped to develop a 19th-stage checklist for the World Health Organization, which reduced preventable deaths in the Netherlands by 47%. And also in the US, I think 33%. So, very briefly, the health safety complex of urban technologies is a big advance. Everything is measured from food to exercise to sleep, and that's been a big advance in terms of how consumers use technology. Energy and utilities, we're much more aware of the energy consumption we have and what drives that, and I think we're using that in making other decisions about how we put our buildings. Video and e-commerce, as I mentioned earlier, has changed. There are huge changes in consumer behavior. And again, the reason I mentioned these is that these are relevant to people who are operating in our industry. We need to connect them to the benefits of our technology without scary outcomes and TMI, too much information. So, very briefly, I'm going to go through these quite quickly. What we've learned, okay, so in terms of what we've learned in deploying technology for building regulations and quality assurance, your name and lights the stick. So one of the things we've learned is it's all about accountability. If you can make people individually accountable, much more difficult. Nobody likes to have their name and red lights on the dashboard. That's one thing we've found, even to the extent that when somebody was 1 week overdue on our software when we first developed it, they would go to the good grade. They lost their mind. So if I could deliver 40 inspections, of course, the system would be 1 week overdue. They get very, very cranky about that. So we changed that to be amber for the first week. Then he goes right after that. But it's something that people got a little bit of anxiety about. We found this people behavioral drive. Once you get a fair requirement to notify everyone what you're going to track and report on in terms of the you can choose all the very significant behavioral changes. One of the things we focused on is collecting records of supervision and so on, and ensuring that they have photographic evidence to demonstrate that they actually have. And that was something that was a small but significantly changing the number of defects we discovered over 3 or 4 years. I won't get into this, but we can get into what this software does at a great point. But basically, it manages defects, inspections, and all of their quality benchmarks using a very clean and simple tracking system. Tracking is very, very valuable for us. And the simpler the idea, the cleaner the interface, the more likely we are to be also going to use data analytics based on unicast to extract information and statistics related to construction defects that can tell us which systems will most likely be found effective across sites, but it also tells us which companies reduce the greatest number of defects to report that back to the companies. Hopefully that's good on that list. People like to learn from their mistakes because we know that this will be reported fast. On the carrot side of things, what's in it for me, it's not all about making people comply. So innovations work best when there are benefits for all stakeholders and they get the right way. So the initiation of a change effort might be relatively easy to trigger. Alex talked about the balloons coming down and the big announcement. It's not about big events, right? The consolidation of that change is where the challenge lies. It's like a constant maintenance of the initiative. Considering the users fully in system design is a big part of that. If you're asking somebody to adopt a new practice, try to design the process in a manner which will bring efficiencies. One thing we did with that was we question ask the subcontractors, which we gave them. We wanted to change the behavior of this. We gave them the gift. We said, you can use this in your budget. Personally, we did it with a very big Northern Irish man who was working on a housing project. He didn't like me one bit, and I said, it's great, we're going to give you an app and you can do all your inspections through that. And he said, I've never used an app in my life, and I'm going to start now. So I said, okay, what are you doing at the moment? And it turned out that he was emailing himself about 50 photographs a day. He was then handwriting his checklists, he was scanning them, and he was emailing those so that he wrote a Word doc. It's taking about 4 hours every time to do it. And we gave him an app that enabled him to do all of that while he walked outside, using his digital checklists. And that was one way of giving him something. And frankly, treat people with respect and talk about this engagement in more detail, highlighting the self-evaluation aspects of that, and get them to focus on that future benefits. Very, very briefly, we've discussed the risk of use of this vehicle. There's another risk arising from digital construction, the overuse of acronyms and complex language, which makes it inaccessible. You kind of need to dim this out a lot in order for people to really buy into the terms. And many stakeholders do not relate to labor digital construction as they simple. We speak to people on the ground, they have not many somebody else. And how do you like these changes to the industry, which could benefit from most of the features of these new technologies? Very briefly on this one, it's behavioral change. Again, from a practice, when we're talking to clients, we need to give them the level of detail to use them. Sometimes we work on a series of projects and the levels were supposed to be. The client didn't really understand where they got to the level 2, they didn't really know what they needed to do to work and how competitive they were going to be. The message is clearer and better and more focused on benefits rather than features. I think it would be more powerful, and the client would be better able to support the maintenance of the process where it needs to go. Closing comments. Currently, huge opportunity to change and improve the culture of our industry. Technology has a huge role to play in this, and many companies are doing incredible work on this field. But in order for it to be as effective as it could be, we need to place as much emphasis on people as we do on the technology itself. And as leaders in the space, and the people in this room, there's a responsibility on everybody to make it as accessible and as relatable as possible to all industry stakeholders, especially those who feel it's not for them. Okay, that's me. Thanks, guys.
And our final speaker in this first module is Pat Kerwin, who is an associate in Henry Lyons Architects. He'll speak on developing a digital future in the built environment, exploiting the full powers of digital models and databases. After Pat finishes, we'll have a short Q&A session with the speakers from this module. Thank you, Pat.
Productivity, well, what is productivity? Productivity is the efficiency of converting inputs to outputs. I think earlier we heard about the effectiveness of productivity and efficiency. So there's no point in having an efficient process if it's not going to be effective. So we need to have effective processes and become efficient in those processes. Right across the design and construction life cycle of the project, we have various inputs and outputs. For instance, the transaction between the client and the design team. We have an input versus an output. Between the design team to contractors, input versus outputs, and contractors to the final product. So it's ensuring that we have efficient, effective procedures and roadmaps in place to deliver that. If we look at productivity within the Irish construction industry, within the Irish economy, ICT, at the start, you can see there's a significant improvement in productivity over 16 years. Next on the list we have agriculture, financial sector, public sector, and at the bottom of the list, the Irish construction industry. So we're thereabouts with public sector. If we just take the construction industry, productivity, pretty much level generally, across 16 years, a couple of peaks there, not majorly significant. And then we overlay labour inputs. So again, as you can see, over boom times, significant increase in labour. Fell off a cliff during the recession, and significant decrease in labour. Productivity relatively stayed the same. If in fact you could say that slight dip in productivity during boom times and a slight improvement in productivity during the recession. Obviously, those that had employment were more efficient. So, in terms of driving that efficiency and driving productivity, what do we need to do to improve those? So one aspect of this, and I think this is a topic that we've generally spoken about quite a lot, is digitization that we spoke about this morning in depth. If we look at digitization across Europe, this is a study carried out by the Institute, digitization of the construction industry is at the bottom of the pile. Again, no surprise, digitization of the ICT sector is at the top. And again, relative to the facts and figures there from the Irish economy, ICT is at the top of the list in terms of productivity. So, can we use digitization to improve productivity? Well, within Henry Lines, I think just a brief overview of our practice. We have 2 offices, one in Dublin and one in Cork. And we specialise in a number of areas: architectural master planning, interior, architect design, etc. Our client list, we have a number of high-profile clients, particularly within the ICT sector, Google, P1, Tech. So I think in terms of our own digital processes, in terms of looking at our clients and also our own internal procedures and digitizing those. And I think then developing our own strategy, which aligns with, as we can see here, leadership standards, education and training, and framing this around ISO 9001 in terms of putting the strategy together, having effective leadership in terms of developing a digitization strategy, putting the processes or standards in place to drive that, and then in particular looking at the education and training, getting staff up to speed in terms of new standards. And I think the key here is the crosstalk between the different systems that we have within our office. Using those systems, be it Sage in terms of our accounting software, cross-linking and talking to various different systems that we have. As a prime example, we have Revit as our primary BIM tool. We have that linked to our document information management system in format. So we can issue documents of drawings directly from new format, from Revit, and then it goes straight into our project cloud CD, personalized CD. We're also looking at delivery, where now we can look at building regulation compliance and rule checks and having design documents there and checks and balances in place in terms of building regulation compliance. Right down to our Revit families, where we're looking at shared parameters, which we talked about, to delivery, and then having MBA class coding, which again will give us the standardization systems. A couple of case studies. Most people might be familiar with this project, the Central Bank of Ireland. One of the design groups in the Central Bank is to create a highly collaborative environment. So in terms of design, we're designing for collaboration. And we're looking at that in terms of utilization of the spaces and such. I think, when you said about designing for collaborative spaces, I think the key challenge here is to deliver digital technology to align with that strategy. So here we have mobile working, encouraging people to become more collaborative with collaborative spaces in areas. So that involved, moving away from your desk, moving away from your PC, having laptops, having tablets, and then having high-speed Wi-Fi, which will enable us digital workflow. And also then other challenges. So, printing to the cloud, being able to pick up your prints or whatever from printers that are adjacent to those spaces. So highly collaborative spaces brought on technological challenges that we need to address. In terms of design, in terms of the overall collaboration strategy within the design team, we're looking at a lot of different digital workflows, not just BIM, etc., but other aspects of the design in terms of fire analysis, CFD analysis, looking at smoke, understanding the routes of smoke, solar gain modeling, in terms of looking at that in terms of the overall energy strategy. It's a highly efficient building. It's probably one of the most energy efficient projects in the state. It has a PR rating of any A2. And then also thermal modeling, and then looking at linking the various aspects to thermal modeling, and then bringing on board sustainability, integrating it within the design process. So those most distinct factors of the building is its facade. The facade acts as a solar veil. It reduces the solar heat gain through the building, which then in fact reduces the amount of cooling that's required. Reducing cooling will reduce your energy loads. So moving on then into how we went about designing the facade and the processes that we put in place for manufacture and construction. You can see here our architectural models, breaking it down into parts, kitted parts, understanding how they all fit together, and designing more efficiently in terms of understanding how each element worked and how each item fitted together more efficiently. Right down to the contractors models. So on the veil we have 3 different colours of a panel with 3 different preparations. So we have like a simple matrix of understanding what colour went where versus its preparation size. Moving into manufacture, I think one of the key elements here is that we use our BIM models, our manufacturers' BIM models, which are done through SolidWorks workflows, and then linked back into the design team via IFC and Revit. But the contractor got great efficiency in linking the design model that they had into their manufacturing processes. As you can see here, we have a veil frame, just a long piece of extrusion cut into 3 sections with perforated panel fixed to it. We had a crown machine which took that length of extrusion, cut it into 3, cut miters, drilled it, had recesses for bracketry, etc. All of that process was automated. It's estimated by the contractor, Architectural Aluminium, that they saved approximately those 1,250 man hours are simply reduction of a process from inputting a manual inputting from a CAD drawing into this machine and inputting that. It's just saying, okay, here's the model, pushing it into the machine. We didn't even incorporate or even look at any other aspect of this, because if we had to do this through more traditional methods, I think you could be adding 6, 7, 8 months to the construction program. We had 2,200 veiled grounds with over 6,000 of these research departments. I don't think this project could have been delivered on time at all if we didn't have this machine. So that they're hard figures in terms of savings and the process of moving from design into manufacture. We also had some lean processes on site in regards to clash detection, coordination, clash detection meetings on site with various contractors, where we're able to test contractors' models and coordinate those on site. Not just the mentality of we're contractor, it's your responsibility to coordinate work, that we've done even more collaborative environment where we had all the key stakeholders involved. Just one of our images of our clash detection models at roof level with quite a long plant. And we also had fire escape routing requirements, so we were able to clash detect the red firewoods against any elements that would be impeding that. Another case study, it's a project which is currently on site at the moment, part of main development, quite a large project, 4 buildings overall, done over 2 phases. Phase 1 is block 3 and block 4. Block 4 is currently under construction, it's adjacent to Facebook. And I'm just going to look at block 4 at the moment. So we have six floors over ground floor and 1 floor basement. We have precast concrete elements, modular construction, repetitive design in terms of size and shape. And that spans around 3 sides of the building. Again, just an overview of some of our models that we use for the facade design. The unique elements of this was the method of construction that we chose for what the northern elevation. The northern elevation butts onto the gable of the modern hotel. We have 750 millimeters of gap between the gable wall and the finished wall of our building. So, in terms of a construction challenge, how do we go about designing primary structure and building envelope to deliver on time and on budget? Well, one of the aspects that our construction methodology that we chose was an element called a sandwich panel. So it had the primary structure, 250 thick wall internally, insulation, and then an external skin. It now came and made in technician as a unit, came to site on the back of the truck and was framed into place. And literally we built it like Lego blocks. So you can see here we have the red at the edge, so the red panels came in, with the floor sitting on top, next to the building across. And that allowed, in terms of construction sequencing, pre-finished, it allowed speed of construction, and then it gave us the quality that we required in a very tight space. So I think, in terms of BIM design and then programming and looking at sequencing, it was all done through the I think one of the unique features of this project again was the work that was done by contractors, specialists, curtains, in regards to the repetitive design, the structural design, and manufacturing drawings throughout the whole process. So again, you can see here in the various concrete elements, the rebar, the reinforcing steel, the details. That was done in a way which allowed then the contractors to take that and to sequence that out via dynamo script, which then took the repetitive nature of going through manufacturing drawings normal lengths of rebar, which you normally see on building sites, but the coils the coils are fed into the manufacturing machine and are just cut as necessary and required. They're all fed, they're all cut via the scripting requirements, and then it's extremely split out at the end with all the rebar coming in, and then connect it all up into their necessary designs. So that takes efficiency. I think, in terms of the design, just the design alone, in terms of designing manufacturing drawings, it took, I think, something in the region of €30,000 saving within the first few weeks in terms of design outputs. So these are the key areas that, in terms of manufacturing, using digital technology to encourage productivity. And other aspects is the structured design that we have. We have cantilever structure on the first floor, which is held up by steel, flexible steel. And then you can see here the design team's models, understanding how they all fit together in terms of building and concrete elements, right down to the contractors' models, and very highly detailed, but again allow great efficiency in terms of understanding the design and looking at sequencing to the finished product. So, in summary, I think if we look at the BIM roadmap, which puts a target for 2021, 20% reduction in project delivery time, 20% increase in construction exports, 20% reduction in capital costs. I think they are all really achievable. In what just looking at some of the case studies that I gave there, I think if we really focus, if we work with the supply chain, understand what's out there, what are the capabilities, when we go through, in terms of production, procurement, I think we can, really achieve those. Finally, to give you a quotation from George Bernard Shaw, progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything.
Okay, if we're going to open it to the floor, does anybody any question for any of the panelists? Go ahead.
Okay, my question is for Alex. First of all, I'm John Duffy from Transport Infrastructure Ireland, so
Hi, John.
I suppose I'm kind of your virtual or digital twin organisation.
Much better looking.
I don't know about that. But, so the question really is, well, I suppose a generalisation from your presentation might be that the UK seem to certainly be charging the way in the delivery of BIM infrastructure, and particularly with the aim and the objective of gaining that competitive edge, particularly for exporting services. So within an organisation like myself here in Ireland, which is similar to yours in the UK, I'd like to ask, what initiatives are the UK taking to upskill the public body clients? You mentioned the capability assessments in the presentation.
Okay, so there's been a number of things that have occurred in the UK, and this is where my kind of proactive, excited head needs to stop itself as well. We need to not become disconnected from the reality that BIM level 2 in the UK is not everywhere to the right level that we require from a standardisation perspective. So in terms of the public sector and the departments, so I look after and support the central government departments, like the Ministry of Justice, Department of Health, etc. So the UK BIM Task Group might be a brand that you've been aware of. as that has moved forward, that has now been essentially outsourced to Cambridge. So we've developed the Cambridge Centre for Digital Build Britain. They still engage and support departments on both a strategic and technical level in terms of their adoption. I would say that from a central government department perspective, the majority of the stakeholders in the room are generally from an asset management background now. They've sort of understood the whole life aspect and opportunity of data and how that transitions through projects into assets. They're very good at the process bit. They kind of understand their technology bit, but they could be better. And from the difficult one is the people bit, as you quite rightly pointed out. How do you diffuse that capability across multiple stakeholders, across a geographical spread that you essentially cannot man-mark? So we've developed a number of different tools. A lot of people have gone their own way, employing various different consulting firms. And I don't think anything has particularly hit the nail on the head yet, if I'm being brutally honest, from a skills perspective. But I guess I'd sort of challenge back on certain things the other way. So, but I put this in 3 levels, yeah? So there's the awareness bit. I think there is enough information out there to organise yourselves to be aware of what BIM is, what the benefits are, and how you might exploit that in your own context individually, as we had from Owen, or as an organisation. The third bit, jumping ahead, is the kind of software bit. So we've had a little bit about sort of Dynamo and Revit and other tools like this. You know, that's very specific to software vendors and how they support individuals. But it's the middle ground. This is the bit I am fighting for with departments and from a public sector client capability perspective, is from a project management and a commercial perspective, do you know what you want? Are you asking for it? And are you measuring what you get back? And from a project management perspective, how are you engendering that sort of leadership and culture that's sort of reflected in the strategy from the NBC to make sure that this is exploited on contracts? Those 2 things, project management and commercial, for me, are the key aspects that still need to be nailed from a public sector perspective.
Any other questions from the floor? Ralph?
Thank you. Pat, you had some fantastic examples there of engaging with contractors and, you know, sort of leveraging technologies and processes. I'm not sure what the procurement process was there, but like, I assume the contract had already been signed and the contract had engaged, and only then could you begin that sort of interaction with the contractor. Just one of the pillars is procurement. Like, what do you think about, maybe this is a question for everyone, but, you know, how do we need to change procurement so that we can have that type of engagement with contractors before you've signed a, whatever, €1 million contract?
Yeah, actually, when you talk about procurement contractors, I think we need to go back to the start. I think we need to look at procurement from a design point of view in terms of, you know, what does the client actually want in terms of procurement, and why do they want it? In terms of digital technology and the efficiencies, I think that we're talking about there. You know, I see submissions coming in looking for BIM or BIM level 2, and that's it. So I think, you know, in terms of procurement, I think we need to start educating those that procure buildings initially, and then move on in terms of manufacture. I think, you know, I've been involved with the Irish Green Building Council for quite a while now, and I think probably during the boom times we were talking about how are we going to get sustainability rating systems more mainstream in terms of the Irish economy and all this. And I think, you know, we had very few LEED rated projects. Now pretty much all commercial buildings are LEED rated, because I think we, you know, focused in on those that started procuring buildings, estate agents, letting agents, and then drive on from there. So we use that as a means of developing more sustainable design into the mainstream. In terms of contractor design, I think, some of the processes that we were looking at there, particularly, steel contractors normally use Tekla for their design in any case. So whether it's BIM, whatever, that's their design, that's how they process designs, and it's just working with the supply chain, working with those guys. So again, the example that I gave in regards to the central bank, we had SolidWorks, for the contractors model. So I think, you need to look at what value are you getting out of a BIM model? What is the process and why do you need it? We didn't need asset information embedded into a facade model, but the facade model was used in a process that got efficiency and delivered greater productivity and greater returns for the contractor. So in just talking to contractors and explaining the processes, and particularly building contractors, I think you have within the top tier building contractors, BIM and digital technologies are now being addressed, and I think construction programming, all of that needs to be fully delved down and explained and transparent. I think some of the systems that we look through with Owen's system, very transparent. Again, we're talking about nobody wants to see their name up in red lights. Absolutely, that's a game changer. Other systems that we're looking at on, say, for instance, Cartflane, we have CitA, and we're looking at using CitA as a CDE. We sat down working with CitA and customized the workflows. So more traditional workflows, if you're familiar with the system, we have an ABC approval status and workshop drawings coming in, and each design team member, so we have, say, facade, contractor, the architect, the structural engineer would each give their own approval, and then the overall approval for that particular drawing is based on the lowest ABC coming in. So we automated that process through CitA. So the system knows, here's the number of design disciplines need to feed into this process. Based on this formula, this is the overall drawing approval. So it's just a simple matter of taking your mundane, repetitive tasks and digitizing them, and then putting a value to that. So in terms of procurement, absolutely, I think we need to start at those procuring buildings. I think the public sector and get those on board, and then look right down through the supply chain. That's the push, and I think then the pull or the carrot is proving and showing how the efficiencies are going to work. So hopefully that.
Thank you very much. My name is Sarah Ingle from the Association of Consulting Engineers of Ireland. The comment was made this morning by one of the panel, I'm not sure, one of the speakers, that if somebody landed on a construction site and who worked on a construction site 100 years ago, that it would look quite similar in many ways with yourself, and 50% perhaps would be changed. One thing that the person might find hasn't changed much either is the amount of women on the construction site.
Right.
And I was wondering what the panel thought of how the use of technology can encourage more women to come into construction.
So we're not using much. We're not doing much for that diversity statistically, right? Yeah, it's a great point. I think in the UK, something like 9 or 10% of the workforce in construction is female. So I think fundamentally, and it's something that doesn't come up so much in regards to Construction Leadership Council, who sort of in the UK represent the industry view in that sense. So they're very much on board with the diversity and inclusion agenda, but they're not thinking about the brand of the industry that we want. So we're not projecting and telling people, this is the industry, these are the opportunities, these are the types of job roles that are available.
Why not?
Why not? It's a great question. I challenge that back to anyone in industry to go and do the same. So if I look at BIM objects numbers internally, we're at something like 30% female, which still not even, but a bit closer to the representative workforce. I think part of the problem is that we get stuck in correct me if I'm wrong here, Owen, something Owen said actually, it's kind of that, you know, mentality that we've always done it this way. And actually, we're not projecting the image of the industry that we want. So people aren't really following that trend. If you look at architecture, engineering, design, actually, I suspect from an education perspective particularly, the numbers are probably fairly even. But if you ask anyone on the street that doesn't know anything about construction, what their image of construction is, it's a hairy-ass guy in high-vis and a hard hat. We have to change that image. Yeah, we have to present a different brand. One quick comparison. So if you look at the UK Armed Forces, and I don't know whether you would have had access to these adverts, but in 2010 they went on a drive to reduce the regular forces and increase the reserve forces. So there's a huge advertising campaign from the Army, the Navy and the RAF. If you look at the Navy and the RAF advertising, none of it is frontline. It's completely diverse. It's all about engineering, it's all about technology, it's all about cool things that you could probably do from your house. Whereas the Army was, unfortunately, I'm calling myself middle-aged now, getting on for middle-aged, guys jumping out of helicopters in fatigues, very frontline, very aggressive. That is our hard hat, high-vis image. We've got to change all the images. And everyone in this room has a moral responsibility to do that.
Okay, thank you. At this, I need to thank the speakers here, and we're going to move on to the final case study. And Pat, I apologize if you didn't get a chance to speak, but Tempest Future. Okay. Our final speakers today are Antonio Liani, the manager of Mola Architecture, and Naomi Lloyd, who is an associate of the firm. They will present a short case study on the Brunswick Street Student Accommodation Project, which will, if the computer simulated images of the entrance are true, open a new vista onto the soon-to-be Technology University of Dublin's Great Garden campus. After Antonio and Naomi's talk, they will be joined for the Q&A session by Mola and Barrett Ahmed, colleagues from the project. Damiano Bianchi, Ed Carthy, Ralph Bingham, and an old friend of mine, Sean O'Leary. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for CitA for inviting us here today to talk about Brunswick Street project. I thoroughly enjoyed all the speakers up to this point, and I suppose it's all very relevant to us in Mola and what we're doing with regard to Revit and BIM Level 2. Today, I'm going to speak more about the micro. I'm just going to talk about what it's like to start working on a Revit project when you've been used to 2D AutoCAD, and just the challenges and the possibilities. And I suppose just to give you an idea, if you're starting off in your office, the challenges you're going to face. So just a brief introduction to Mola. It was founded in 2010. This is just really to do with BIM. Our first project was in 2013, and currently we've 45 staff, and at least half of us are using Revit. Some recent projects completed in Revit, one Woodman Lane, TC1 to Cherrywood planning application, and capital application. We currently have 5 projects that are BIM Level 2 in the office at different stages. So when we looked at putting this case study together, we had a brief look at the evolution of student accommodations. This is a student accommodation building we're going to be talking about, one of the largest in Dublin with 571 beds. So I'm just going to pass it over to Sean very briefly just to talk about this little study here. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Naomi. Sorry, I'm going to it's a bit of a distraction. It's not a small slideshow. I'm not sure why I'm here. I have the distinction of building a three-dimensional model in 1973 at UCLA from a shortest pass algorithm. It was the beginning again of my computer career because I crashed the whole system, which at that stage was contributing to the development of the internet. But that being said, I have maybe a slightly diverse interest in history, and in the discussions with my colleagues, I told my fascination with the plan of St. Gall, which is the oldest surviving drawing in Europe. It's in a monastery in St. Gallen in Switzerland. It's the bottom right. All I'm going to commend to you is that if any nerds in the house want to just Google plan of St. Gall, St. Gallen, you get some idea why it might be fascinating. But equally, I'm not probably narrow-minded enough to recommend BIM is more than drawing, but equally drawing is historically the medium of communicating ideas and intentions. But critically, and it's something that I suppose every day you forget to remember, and when I see the capacity and fragility of BIM, you can look at what has happened with manuscripts like Gall is that what you'll find is that in the same university where I crashed the system, they've digitized the whole plan, and they have interrogated using essentially BIM to establish what environment conditions, what the refectory were, what might have grown in the garden, the orientation assumptions were, and a whole dispute about what scales were used, whether it was a plan for a building or an ideal building. And I suppose what it is also saying is that sometimes a drawing that's had survived for over 1,000 years can also tell us that drawings are very fragile. I had contact with another capacity with the Irish Architecture Archive. The first generation digitally generated drawings were simply not recoverable. So it's a little small metaphor, and I'll shut up with that, but equally, the linkage between history of monasticism and student housing is one which is interesting. Okay, sorry about that.
Thanks, Sean. So just to give you a little background to the project, it's been officially called Art Garden House. The client is Global Student Accommodation GSA, who are based in the UK. They started in 1991 with 100 student beds, and they now have accommodation all around the world for students. This site, you can see there on the right, is 0.76 hectares. Just so you see the area there, we'll run through it all. But it started on site January last year with Bennett Construction. It's a design build contract, and it's due for completion at the end of this month. It already has 5 blocks handed over and 7 blocks in total, so 2 more. Just to give you a little background to myself and this project, I joined MODA in August last year, so the project was on site. I took over as project architect, and a lot of the hard work had been done. The structural model and the architectural model had been coordinated, clashes had been sorted out from that level. So when I joined, it was about getting packages out to site, partitions, setting out finishes. So we were kind of in the middle of all that, and on site it was just the superstructure was going on. So I suppose for me, I had done a 3-day Revit Essentials course a couple of years before, and I really enjoyed it. It was a good little drawing here. When I did the course, it was mind-blowing. Just the capabilities of Revit and BIM was very exciting. But unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to work on a Revit project straight away, so and then I started drawing. So I compared to, it's like learning a new language. I think a few people have mentioned all the acronyms and standards that you have to get familiar with. That can be a bit mind-blowing. It's a little diagram here from. But got there in the end, and I started to really enjoy working on the project, just getting to understand Reddit and how the build level 2 process works. So it's briefly pros and cons, and this is kind of from, there's a lot of them, but these were the strongest ones for me. Pros, obviously, collaboration and shared information. Seeing the project from every angle, as a designer, being able to just turn the model whatever way you want, walk through it, stand in different areas of a large space and see what everything looks like is very useful. Realistic images were possible, they aided our design, quick design options. I just showed that I put up these two images here. The one on the left is a CGI of the entrance area, the one on the right is an actual photo of the entrance area. This is a very complicated space to design with services, big transfer beams. There was a lot going on in this space, and we really found Revit a very useful tool, and you can see what we imagined it to look like. It's very similar to what it did end up looking like. If I didn't like Revit for anything else, I would love it for scheduling alone. There was over 2,000 doors in this job, and being able to do that through Revit and not manually was delightful. Coming from many hours of doing scheduling in my past. And then clash detection. Clashes is a word that I'm very familiar with early on. Anyone that works in Revit will know it's all about just looking at the different model, the structure of the M&E, and just going through all the clashes and eliminating them. The cons, the biggest con I think for me starting off was just relearning how long it's going to take to do packages when you're trying to get information to site. It just doesn't take at the same time. Things that are very quick in AutoCAD were slower and vice versa. One example is reflected ceiling plans. In AutoCAD, they're usually very quick to generate. You're just putting circles and rectangles on your plan. Usually fast to get out. In Revit, it's a different story. You're actually cutting a hole in plasterboard. You're placing a light fitting. It's just a whole other layer to it. We did struggle, and we do still work on trying to get good quality 2D drawings out of the model. Design decisions need to be considered early on to avoid repetition. That's just the sooner you know what you're putting into the model, the better, because then you're not going back and working on it again later on. Working with BIM, just a few lessons, I suppose. Communication is put up first. It's like any other project you work on, any other program, but communication is the key to success. We had a good team that sat down every week. The BIM manager Antonio sat down with us, and we looked through what we call the health of the model, which is related back to clashes, just to see how we were getting on with that, and also to program getting information to site. And with that, the more I learned about how Revit works, how families are made, the better I got at estimating that as well, because I was understanding more what the BIM technicians were doing in the office and how long each process would take. We had some conversations about in the office at different times when we were doing different packages about. I was trying to understand how much detail do we have to put into different elements. One thing we looked at was the flooring. Initially, we started off the room was a rectangle. The flooring was put in as a rectangle, but then we're like, what happens at the door? Can we just draw the floor going straight along and leave a little gap under the door? Do we have to notch in the floor everywhere? And in a large building like this, that was quite a bit of work. I remember Antonio and myself had this conversation, and he made the point that you should model the same way as you build. And that was very useful for me. I kept coming back to that if I was in doubt about how we should proceed with model. So we did put around the floors, halfway under the door. That's what we did in the model. And also some of the acronyms I learned, BEP and LODs, the BIM execution plan and the level of detail. Just, I learned to refer to this. We all did in the team, just when we were doing new elements, creating new families, what level of detail is required, what has the client asked for, what have we agreed to deliver. And then just to think about everything that you model before you go and work on it, and to do that as a team, to sit down and think about what you need. An example here is our external wall. That's just a little small little image there on the right. Initially, our external wall was one family with every layer from the brickwork to the plasterboard internally. And then we thought about that more and realized there's going to be concrete columns in the middle of these walls. And if we don't break up the external wall into further elements, we're going to have an external wall just running over the column. It's just not going to look right, and it's going to be hard to deal with in the model. So, the external wall should be broken up into smaller elements. Just little things like that you're always looking at it and considering as you're working on the model. And just to repeat that, just to agree a strategy for modeling and for the graphical data in the model. Advantages for the client then. We've looked at this as well. Better visualization for them to know what their end product is going to be. Realistic CGIs for marketing was very important for this client because they started advertising these bedrooms months ago, so they wanted good quality images. So then on the left is a CGI of one of the courtyards, and on the right is progress motion of the courtyards. You can see the similarity, and that on the right, top right, is the CGI of the bedroom. Clash detection, again, this comes back to efficiency, trying to get the clashes that might happen on site by catching them first in the model. Asset information, this is really just the information that we put into every element, every family that goes into a model. And this is mainly what GSA use the models for. They've been getting Revit models for their last few projects. And they find this very useful for looking at materials and particularly M&E plans. And then facility management and building operations as well. They haven't quite got into that yet using the model, but it is their aim to do that in the near future. I'll pass you over now to Antonio, who's going to talk more about BIM. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll take first start the second half of it. Of this presentation. Suppose I introduce myself. I study in Italy as an Italian. I study what is called in Italian the geometer, which would be kind of a technical architect. There is not really an equivalent in Ireland or in UK. It's Napoleon school system. That was 20 years ago. And then in Ireland, I developed my career with architects. I mostly work with architects. And then I decided to study construction management and also master in BIM. Where I am today with my career is about BIM implementation, BIM process, and to see, refer to UK, see where we are today, Ireland, the strategy in Ireland, and see actually where we can go from here. So basically, if I come back to this project, as we spoke software, we spoke about digital communication. This is all very important. where I always trying to put that into BIM level 2 process, BIM level 2 project. It is actually the process. So in other words, when we look at this project here in Brunswick Street, we really have to say we had a good process on it. We had an EIR, we had a BIM execution plan, and a master information delivery plan was dated as we needed. And also, we look at coding. At the moment, we are looking at in details with the client as it was part of the requirement. So, if I look at, so basically, initially, I see I intentionally created 3 points. This slide here, you look at past 1192, okay, on the BIM process, and you're looking at the strategy. Okay? Intentionally, I left the EIM, the Asset Information Manager. So at the very early stage, the client actually has to say what we want, how we're going to do this. And we have now also the ORI template that explains the EIR and the black and white that you can see there. We look at the project information, technical management, commercial needs of the client. At this stage, you might not be able to answer all the questions. And so what you want to really do is not to deny that it's there. By not having an answer doesn't mean that you don't have to deal on the next stage of the BP. And sometimes you have to. So you have a stage where you agree, disagree, or negotiate. That's the way I see it. Very important is when the EIR was completed is that the information of EIR are communicate and transfer correctly to BP. As you know, one thing we have to be aware of in the industry, we always have a pre-contract. One of them is, okay, so we have to always make sure that when we prepare this pre-contract BP, for the tender, yes? And then what we do, we put it together, the EIR, the BP, pre-contract, and then we have the BP post-contract. And that's critical. That was very critical in this project as well. So, as all the information on the BP and the design team that together with the stakeholder agree and everything, you have to develop this BP, which is not one version. Revision as a team is really a dynamic environment. It's quite a challenge to predict everything from the very early stage of EIR. So you do need to be a little bit dynamic. When I say dynamic, I say in the sense that you have to always keep what is in your agenda on EIR, on the BP, and then when you do clash detection, when you look at the CIC protocols and everything, you might say, okay, we can do that. We can do that. We can change, we can give more, we can improve the level of details, the level of information on this particular family. So you have to try to find that balance between when do you need a revision of BP and when actually it's just normal workflow. And that's in order really to make a good master information delivery plan, you actually need a very good master information. You need a model that can satisfy what are the needs on site. And then as you are on site, for example, you have to also create the packages. You have to create the door packages, window packages. So the challenge there is really to be able to coordinate both site's needs and package. So we are now working on this, the model is completed, geometry are completed. What we are looking at, we are looking at the best approach for the plan to use of data that we are developing in the model. And yeah, we are really at the late stage of this. So what is left now is to populate the model with probably that we can actually use for the example. So at the end of a project, probably my personal approach, and that's what I brought into all as well. But it's such a review where we are, what have we done, what are we here, what are we going to do next. And as we were talking about this presentation here with Sean, we were saying that what communication still is a key factor. How do you communicate? The different way of communicating. Past 1192 is there, yeah? You all agree? It's there. But many times have you walk around the city, yeah? And you meet two tourists, yeah? With a map on their hands, yeah? Phone here, yeah? With Google Map, and they still ask you, excuse me, where can I find this place? Yeah? So the point I'm making here, Pine has been said previously. Pine say, oh yes, I'm a past 1192 to 2013, 3, 14, yes. So good. How do you actually interpret it? How do you use? So the industry really needs directions. A team needs direction. I might need directions. So there is a stage where there is a standard, and then there is an interpretation of standard. By looking at this, I found this slide here. I found very interesting. I'd like to share the evolution of technology, the evolution of actually we communicate. Okay. So they start with papyrus, and then if you look at the gap there, 100 AD paper was invented in China, right? And then you look at 1000 AD pencil. Then you look at 1400, there was the first printing process, it was in Germany. And now, so you look at text editing, that was the way they were communicating. Now you look at optical singers, around the 16th century. And then you have audio singers. And then you have another tool, optical and audio singers. That's where we are in this stage. And if you look at the evolution since 1969, it's almost perfect. So we are going fast. We are learning faster. And we need things faster. Technology needs also be approached by technique. Lunar-listing invented well for today. It's very normal for us having a perspective view in Revit. But the evolution of actually having a linear perspective back in it was revolutionary. That's allowed many architects to express their design and to build churches that in this case like before mine. So back into where we are really looking at the UK Peace Strategy 2011. This was a very ambitious program. As it was mentioned by Alex before me, they really focus, they look at what is the public sector. How can we improve the public sector? How can we be more efficient? And that's, we have a very good starting point when we say build level 2 implementation from UK. Actually, but I will not go as Alistair wants to show his slides here. So my approach, my philosophy, if you like, wherever there is a problem, there is an opportunity. Okay, so the red one of problem. But the target of 2016 as a being level 2 monitoring in UK, that's what we are following at the moment. can be a problem, but it can also be an opportunity for benefit. So if you embrace this process, it's actually an opportunity. The problem is you cannot tender people level 2 if you don't have a people level 2. It's about company, it's about strategy. It's I'm not here to say it's right or wrong. I'm sure there will be market for the traditional approach as well in the next 4 or 5 years in UK now. But it's all about where you want to go. So here in Ireland, you're following you also have a strategy for years. We are really looking at, more like we are really looking at tools and leadership, standard education, training, and procurement is the big word, in my opinion, these days when it comes to procurement. I think we need more research into it. I think we need more understanding. I think we need more collaboration of looking at what is the procurement, what is the BIM process. And coming from the National BIM Council, this is the question and answer that I ask to myself, ask to my colleagues, and I monitor the company that I work with. I look at the end of the day, we are all human beings. We spoke about technique, but it was very interesting to hear this morning morale, behavior. As you know, in management, we have different school of thought. Mine is behavior as a starting point, then expand to the other 3 or 4. But this is really, if you want to ask to yourself a question, how do I feel when I use a Revit? I am anxious because you have no skill, you have never used Revit before. This is something that you can do sometimes, and I use this as a survey in the company every 3 months. I send to monitor the gap of implementation, and that's where. Yes. While you're coming up to the podium, could I draw your attention in your booklets to the CitA October program? In fact, that there is a 30% discount if you book any of the courses during October. With that commercial over, have we any questions for the presenters here?
Yeah, just wondering, to what extent did the client, GSA, buy into this whole BIM process?
I have to say, GSA is one of those clients that is open to BIM. So it was very easy in that sense to work with them. Because that's a very interesting point, Alan, is that when we come back to the EIR, for example, as a BIM manager, I suppose it's my responsibility as well to make sure that the client understands what they're looking for. And so there is also a process really in this BIM Level 2 implementation process to actually educate the client. And this is a very, very critical aspect of it. But we found the GSA with previous experience, background, so it was easier to work with this.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well, Antonio. And I suppose at the end of this process as well, they are reviewing the information that they need for COBE, which is basically just putting how much information they want within the model. I think at the start, and I think someone mentioned it in one of their speeches, that clients can ask for everything and they may not necessarily need it all. or want it all, but you know, it all goes in at the start, and then they've actually been looking at it and refining that and saying, do we actually need all this detail in the model? And we're working with them on that to just refine it to what is going to be useful to them.
And could I just ask a supplementary question? As a client, were they experienced in defining what they're looking for, or are they in a learning mode themselves?
I think they are in a learning mode, but they have a couple of projects that they did before this one, where they had a model and a BIM level 2 model, so they have learned, you know, so and I think they're going to keep refining it as they go along. As I mentioned, they're mainly using it for asset information, but they want to get more involved with using it for facility management, which is which will be a big thing for them.
I think you will recall years ago, facility management in the UK presented at one of the breakfasts, and they went through COBE and they said, we begin to realize we really should concentrate on the things we should have in every van, not the actual things that never break. So essentially, that is what they were doing, driving around from school to school, fixing doors. Doors were a big problem, obviously, in schools. Any other question?
I might just take the opportunity to introduce Damiano and Ed from Bart Mahoney. They were the structural engineers involved as well, if anyone has any questions for them.
Alex, go
Hi.
ahead.
First of all, I love this graphic. I think that's very, very telling. It's great to hear you're taking advantage of some of the UK processes that have been established, etc. So, how are you looking to sort of optimise that journey now going forward? So, with particular focus on LOD and levels of development.
The point, one of the points I was making during my presentation really is if we look at the evolution, the way technology has developed in the last good few centuries, and you look at your BIM 2011 strategy, okay? So you're looking really from 2011 up to 2010, move from BIM level 1 to BIM level 3. So it is quite challenging. It is quite challenging. Basically, what as I mentioned before, it is it's very critical to produce a model production delivery table at the very beginning into an EIR. And then when you go into a BIP, you really have to fragment this the element of the buildings and see what is the level of development, the level of information that you really need. And also, when it comes to COBE, it is critical to take COBE into account as well. So that's where we are at the moment. Really, we are looking at what we delivered. We are looking at, as I spoke to Damian before, and say, Damian, next project, we're just going to work on the cloud, you know, BIM 360. I think it is a better way of communication. As you say, that's the level of development that we want. And also we use a BIM toolkit. It's quite useful. And by clicking at the only class of each one, it really gives you an idea of what is required in terms of level of details, level of information in each stage of the project. So, if I can put it into this way, we are not trying to invent anything. We are just trying to get on top of the game of what we have at the moment. And as Einstein used to say, learn the rules of the game and be the best, I would just say, just do your best. Yeah.
Thank you. But I think crucially, Antonio, you are saying that you believe going forward you will be using BIM on everything.
Yeah, if you really, going forward, actually, if I can say here, maybe in this stage, you're talking about BIM level 2. Quite often you say BIM is the future. I would say BIM is actually the present. We are delivering asset. So actually in the future, I'm not sure if it's BIM, if it will be called BIM. Just my observation, yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I'm not sure there's a question or a comment, but Sean, I appreciated your comment at the beginning about the drawing and the tools of communication, and I suppose, and the historical development of communication tools, and how for many, many years architects and engineers have communicated through two-dimensional drawings, specifications, schedules. You know, so you described the building through 6 or 7 media, one building, and now we have the technology to describe a building through a model where all the same information is sort of input once rather than 7 different media and managed in one place. So that in itself brings enormous efficiencies, and I think people also forget that, you know, if you've studied as an architect for 6 or 7 years, or an engineer, you understand drawings, but for 90% of people, like a drawing means nothing. You know, they might as well be looking at a piece of paper with black marks on it. They don't really appreciate it. So the communication tool of BIM is, you know, is a great advancement, and it's been there for 20 years. But why is the industry so reluctant to adopt it, in your opinion?
Well, I'm certainly not proclaiming any expertise in the daily practice of BIM. And like Gareth Fitzgerald, you know, I keep asking myself, you know, I know it works in theory, but does it work in practice? You know, but your general point, I think, is probably one of great interest to me. And on a kind of a slightly lighter note, one of the byproducts of the UCLA St. Gallen digitizing project was that it spawned a series of games. You can actually check it. This company developed a gaming system based on a very considered scholarly interrogation of a set of 9th century drawings. And my colleagues in Henry J. Lyons, they showed thermal modelling at the early stage of the central bank. They've actually recreated what the microenvironment of the refectory in this ideal plan might be. But in the gaming, which is pitched at children mainly, a child could elect to go as a visitor, can go as a scholar, a student, or a monk, and go through and discover different stories along the way. So, I suppose hidden behind the layers of that simple parchment drawing are layers of history. There are layers of meaning, layers of implicit values. It was touched on today, you know, what in fact were the prevailing ethos in relation to labour, in relation to values. They can be read in every drawing. BIM, to me, has the huge potential not only to be a medium of communication, but it also is a fantastic capacity to record in the present, but also record for the future what those values were. So I think that it has been a major leap in terms of the capacity of a drawing, whether it's digitally generated or drawing in parchment, to do precisely that. And I suppose as one gets older, as I am, you keep reflect on the value of that, because what I see, and I mentioned very, I don't know whether it was audible or not, but talking to my colleagues in the Architecture Archive, and certainly the early generations of loss, huge loss of drawn information, which is not simply about the drawing, it's about what that project was about and what those lines meant to the people who drew them and the people who intended them, and what values and stories they told.
Okay, any final question? To you goes the pleasure or the privilege of asking the final question, so make it meaningful.
No pressure, so.
No,
Just a continuation of Sean's discussion there. When you have a BIM model, you have a very, you've built a very detailed performance model of a building, an engineered model with the components modelled in the way that it's anticipated they would be built. At completion of the project, is there a continuation? So does the performance of the building, can that be measured post-occupancy? So for instance, can you check the assumptions that were made about environmental conditions within the rooms, you know, temperature, humidity, overheating? Can you check other things like, you know, how the occupants are engaging with that building? Is there any kind of post-completion way that you can validate design decisions and then use that learning to bring it to the next building or inform activities within the building? So it's kind of measuring that performance gap, the difference between design assumptions and actually the operation of the building.
Yeah, as part of BIM Level 2, we have the soft landing, which is a period of 2 years where the client, public client, they really want to monitor if the money was spent. And yes, your question is very interesting. Yeah, there are studies at the moment on the go. If I'm not wrong, there was a case study on the museum in Copenhagen. I'm not 100% sure if it's the right city. But yes, and it will become more and more normality, I think. It is very important to see the workflow, the occupancy, as in other words, as your point, we have a room for a specific scope. I suppose the room actually never been used. Maybe the room can be redesigned or renamed to a different different use. So yes, that's I haven't done myself. I know there have been research on it, and it's definitely one of those things that, as I said, who knows in the future are we going to call this BIM process now, but it's definitely we are going in this direction, yes.
Anybody else on the panel want to comment on that, on validation of design from
Is it entirely shy?
No, the only thing that I would like to add is talking about the level of details that you mentioned earlier. Sometimes we work usually on millimeters. Sometimes we receive a phone call on Friday evening saying, look, your model is off 1 millimeter. Fair enough. But the point, this is something that I call a surreal situation, because all the process, all the building process, I don't know actually if it's ready for the BIM. In the meaning that we're talking about level of details, level 2, level 3, increasing all the information. There is a lot of information linked to the model, but at the end of the story, the most of them are we are required to provide information. But the weak point of all this project is actually the information, because from my experience here in Ireland, most of the time, one side we have a phone call saying, okay, we're off 1 millimeter, or we're talking about millimeter, but on the other side, we are just starting pouring foundation, but we don't know anything about what's going on the upper floor. It's coming from Italy, where we can start a building site if you don't have all the repart drawings or everything from amenities, all the consultancy office, all the packages should be ready. And sometimes here we start building, but we don't know exactly where we're going. So it's quite scary from one side, and on the other side there is a level of precision, level of detail required. The beam, it's an opportunity, it's a tool, but I think we need to coordinate with the whole process of the building, construction, and general market in an island, in my humble opinion. Thank you.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. I think the world I came from, there's no question everything was fast-tracked. You needed to use intuition to guess where you were going. There was a lot of corrections made in the intervening period. But you did actually gain critical time, which was a big parameter. I think I'm going to bring the gavel down on this morning's proceedings, but just before I do, can I thank again the presenters, Pat, Owen, Alex, Naomi, and Antonio. And also, I'd just like to thank the sponsors today, BAM Ireland, Diatech, Graphisoft, Learning Equipment Services, Murphy Surveys, SIS, Solibri, and Topcom. And with that, I wish you a good day. Thank you.
The American part.
Wow,